In this video, I'm going to help you to revise plant cells. When you look closely at buildings, you can see that they're made of bricks. Living things like plants are built of cells. And if you look really closely at this diagram of a plant, you will see the tiny little cells that the plant is built from. As you know, plants have got many different parts. There's the leaves, the roots, the stem, and different parts of the plant contain different types of cells. The cells in the leaves look something like this, and they look quite different to these cells which are found in the root. And then the cells in the stem look different again. In exam questions, you often get asked to label this diagram of a cell, so today we'll focus on this, a typical plant cell. So keep watching the video and I'll help you to make sure you can name the key parts of the cell. I'll help you to label the diagram of the cell, and I'll help you to explain the jobs or roles of the different cell parts. The video also includes check-in points to help you to make sure you're understanding key ideas, and I'll try to drop in some revision tips along the way. So welcome to BioSmash. I'm Jo, I'm a science teacher, and I'll help you to smash your biology revision. So let's start by looking at why plant cells need a cell wall. I think it's helpful to think of a cell as a bag full of liquid, and in this model we call the bag the cell membrane. And just like a closed bag, the cell membrane controls what gets in and out of the cell. If the bag is closed, nothing can get in. However, if the bag is opened, then something can pass through and get into the cell. The liquid inside the cell is called the cytoplasm. And all of the cell's chemical reactions take part inside the cytoplasm. Animals, including humans, have got a skeleton, and the skeleton gives their body support and shape. This means that our cells don't have to have a fixed shape because the shape of our body is controlled by our skeleton. However, because plants don't have a skeleton, each of their cells is put into a box, and this box is called the cell wall. And here you can see I've drawn a diagram of this box, the cell wall. And this cell wall or this box gives the plant the structure and support that we get from our skeleton. Here I've drawn the cell inside the cell wall. So you can see where the cell membrane is, and you can see that the cytoplasm is inside the cell membrane. In reality, a plant cell actually looks a little bit more complicated. It looks like this, but hopefully you can still see the cell wall, you can still see the cell membrane, and you can still see the cytoplasm. If you've reached this point in the video, you must be working hard at your revision, so let's see how much you can remember so far. Here's a diagram of a plant cell. Can you name part A, part B, or part C? And if you want a bit of help, here are the answers in a muddled up order. So each of these needs to be put at the correct position. So one is A, one is B, one is C. And I'll put the answer up in 3, 2, 1. So here's the answer. The top bit is pointing to the cell wall, the middle arrow is pointing to the cell membrane, which is inside the cell wall, and then the bottom arrow is pointing at the cytoplasm. So well done if you've got all of that. If you're not quite sure, you might need to go back and watch some of the earlier parts of the video before moving on. If you are ready to move on, you'll have noticed that there are lots of other parts inside the cell. In this next part of the video, we'll look at the two largest parts found inside the plant cell. And one of those is a large ball shape, which is called the nucleus. Hopefully you can now spot the nucleus in this diagram of a plant cell. As you may know already, the nucleus's job is to control the cell, and inside the nucleus, because it's a hollow ball, you will find the genetic material or the DNA. So these two sentences are really useful sentences to write down and repeat in exams. So the nucleus controls the cell and it contains genetic material. The genetic material is really just a set of instructions that the cell follows. So we call those instructions genes. So the nucleus contains lots of genes. If you want to spend a bit of time revising the nucleus, then check out this video. I'll put the link below. Another large part inside the cell is the vacuole, and you can see that labelled here. And the vacuole contains the cell sap, so that's the key line that you need to write down and remember for exams. Now let's look at some of the smaller parts found inside the plant cell. The plant cells need to carry out all of the jobs needed to keep the plant alive. One thing the plant needs is energy. It needs the energy to help it to grow. So plant cells contain lots of tiny mitochondria. Hopefully you can spot the mitochondria in this diagram of a plant cell. Just to mention, if you've got lots of mitochondria, we call them mitochondria, but if you're talking about just one of them, we use the word mitochondrion. So here I've just labelled one of them, so I've called it a mitochondrion. And each of the mitochondria carries out a special chemical reaction where it takes in sugar and breaks it down to release energy that the plant can use. And this chemical reaction is called respiration. And I've actually made a whole video about mitochondria and how they work. So if you haven't watched it yet, have a look at it. The link's below. For the mitochondria to be able to do their job and break down glucose to get energy, the plant actually needs to make the glucose in the first place. And this is where the chloroplasts come in. So a plant cell contains lots of these green chloroplasts. And in this diagram, I have labelled one of the chloroplasts. And chloroplasts carry out a different chemical reaction called photosynthesis. And in photosynthesis, the chloroplast uses light energy to carry out a chemical reaction that makes sugar, or the sugar is sometimes called glucose. As well as making glucose, the plant also needs to build proteins so that it can use these to grow. So inside plant cells, you'll also see lots of these little ribosomes. If you're looking for the ribosomes in the diagram, they're the really small ones, and I've labelled one of them here. And ribosomes have the job of building proteins, and they do this through a process called protein synthesis. And yes, you guessed it, there is another video all about ribosomes, so if you haven't seen it yet, the link's below. So we've reached that point in the video where it's time for you to have another check-in to see how much you can remember. Now on this page, you will see a description of various cell parts. So the first cell part's job is to build proteins for the cell. The second part is to release energy for the cell. The third cell part's job is to build sugars or glucose for the cell. And the fourth description of a cell part is that this cell part contains a cell sap. So what you need to do is look at each of those descriptions and work out which cell part is being described. Now I'm going to put the answers up in a few seconds. So if you're not ready and you want a bit more time, just pause the video and see if you can work out which key word goes with each of these descriptions. And if you need a bit more help, here are the 4 key words, but they're in the wrong order. So one of these descriptions is describing the job of ribosomes. One of them is describing the job of the chloroplasts. One of them describes the vacuole, and one of them describes the job of mitochondria. So you need to decide which description goes with which key word. And the final answer is coming in 3, 2, 1. So here's the answer. The ribosomes build proteins for the cell. The mitochondria release energy for the cell through respiration. The chloroplasts build sugar or glucose for the cell. And the vacuole contains the cell sap. So have a look, see how you've done. If you want to write down any of these descriptions so you can remember them and use them in the exam, that would be a good idea, and you can pause the video now. You may also find it helpful to use some of the other resources that I've produced, and I've put the link to the online shop below so you can have a look at them. In this one, there's a storyboard that helps you to remember the key ideas from each topic. So have a look, see if there's any resources there that you might find helpful. Final part of the video. In this section, we're going to look at an exam question to see how much you have remembered. If you think you need to go over it again before we do the exam question, then feel free to watch the video again beforehand. If you're feeling ready, carry on. So here's the first part of the exam question. There's a diagram of a leaf cell. 5 parts have been labelled. They've been labelled A, B, C, D and E, and you need to work out what each of those is labelling. So what cell part is being labelled. So see if you can jot down the letters A, B, C, D and E, and next to each one, write down the name of that cell part. And if you need to, you can pause the video, but the answers are coming in 3, 2, 1. So part A is labelling the very outside of the plant cell, which is the cell wall or the box that the cell is in. Part B is labelling the vacuole. Part C is labelling the chloroplast. Part D is labelling the nucleus. And label E is labelling the ribosome. So see how many you got correct. If you need to, you can go back and practice that again, but if you feel ready, you can go on to the second part of the exam question, which is to explain the job of each of the parts that you've labelled. So you've got your 5 cell parts labelled now. You need to write a description of each of the jobs of those cell parts. So the first cell part is a cell wall, and the cell wall gives a cell strength and support. So we're looking for those words, strength and support. For the part vacuole, the key phrase you need to remember is contains cell sap. So if you've written cell sap, you can give yourself a point. For chloroplasts, there's two things you need to mention, and that is glucose and photosynthesis, because a chloroplast makes glucose through photosynthesis. The next part is the nucleus, and the job of the nucleus is to control the cell. And you also can get a mark if you said it contains genetic material or it contains DNA. So ideally, you would say it controls the cell and it contains DNA or contains genetic material. And then finally, the ribosome's job is to build proteins for the cell, and it does it through a process called protein synthesis. So 1 mark for proteins, 1 mark for protein synthesis. So a big well done for reaching the end of the video. I hope you found it helpful. We have covered a lot today, so it's unlikely that you will remember it all the first time. I recommend you keep watching this video until you've got all the key points and can answer the exam questions. You might find it helpful to watch it again tomorrow and then the next day, and hopefully each time you watch it, your grades will improve. If you haven't already, please subscribe and then you'll see our other videos, and I put the links to some of the videos you might find helpful after this one in the comments below. So I hope to see you again soon, and well done.